All right, I guess we'll go ahead and start. First part's a bit of a preamble anyways, so people can trickle in. So welcome to Denver Startup Week. Thank you for joining us at the 11th Annual Denver Startup Week. Thank you to our title sponsors, Amazon, Capital One Cafe, Dell for Startups, and the Downtown Denver Partnership. Without these sponsors and a bunch of other sponsors, this wouldn't be happening, so thank you to all of them. This session is part of the product track sponsored by Pi Insurance. This is one of 8 programming tracks aimed at supporting the entire startup ecosystem. By attending this session, you are agreeing to follow our code of conduct as well as to being photographed or recorded on video. Be sure to share your experience of this session online using the hashtag DenStartupWeek. And then here's another list of sponsors, so yeah, thank you to everybody. All right, so this is not very tightly titled, How to Not Ruin Your Life Making Your First Physical Product. We've got a gallon of information here and a shot glass of time, so I apologize in advance. It's going to be a fire hose. However, this is going to be structured as a 30-minute talk and then a 30-minute panel. I'm joined by Chuck Hodges of Zebulon Solution and Dan Bodenstein of Bold Engineering Studio. The great news is they're both better rounded than I am as well, so I'm going to spend a lot of time on the stuff that I know, which is product development, and then I'll kind of rush through the manufacturing piece, and then we'll have time for people to ask questions and get actual useful information out of these two once the time comes. So as part of that also, please just save any questions you have until the end. There'll be hopefully plenty of time to Q&A. So we'll start with a cautionary tale. This is the coolest cooler. By any normal metric, they were a huge success. They raised $13 million on Kickstarter, plus they had a bunch of post sales as well, so who knows how much they really raised. And they had 62,000 backers on Kickstarter. So, again, by any normal metric, a huge success. However, the person who launched this campaign, his life was basically a hell for 4 years because he didn't really know what he was doing, and most importantly, he hadn't priced his product properly. And so he was, even though he had $13 million, he didn't have enough dollars to actually make good on his product. For reference, a similar cooler, if you go on Amazon, is about $150 to $200. This is a cooler that also has a blender, a speaker, lights, really nice wheels, a cool handle. It's a party on wheels, I think was the tagline. That's all great, but at $212 per backer on average, they did not have enough money to deliver. And so, hopefully this will help you avoid that horrible fate because he spent 4 years. I think there were like 25,000 comments on Kickstarter when I last checked. And then he just stopped in 2018. He just cut ties, and I don't blame him. So this is a very carefully made chart of the path we're going to take. We all know the classic game Profits Land. As you know, as this is laid out linearly, I spent a lot of time on this, but you can draw cards that will send you back. And so it's not really a linear process. It is a very cyclical process. If you do it linearly, you're doing it wrong. Also a quick note, I have a version of these slides up on my website at functionaldesign.co/DSW. Because it's a fire hose, I basically pulled all the text out of the slides, but I have a version of the slides with a bunch of text on it, so don't worry about making a bunch of notes. That's all there, and I think there's also a recording of this. Sorry about that. Quick disclaimer, this is basically a tale from the point of view of consumer hardware. There's many other kinds of hardware, medical, B2B, high volume, low volume. I'm gonna focus mostly on kind of mid-high volume. However, these lessons apply to almost any product you make, whether it's a digital product or really anything out there. Obviously certain things about how to price out electronics is not very relevant for that, but overall this should be useful in kind of a more well-rounded way. So we'll start out, you've got an idea or you've got a desire to make something. The first thing you want to do is to make sure you're making something someone will buy, right? We're not building a charity here. We're not hopefully doing an ego thing. You actually want to figure out what is a problem that people have, what is a problem that you can solve, and then how much are they willing to pay to solve this problem. This is kind of a 101 thing, but it is very relevant. Right? You might have an idea, you might have a great solution, but if you can't match price to cost, you don't even want to start. As part of that too, who is the incumbent, what is out there? Even if you're better than something else, are you so much better than something else? And then within that too, what does it take someone to leave the incumbents? So you want to start out with a very, very loose hypothesis. And I'll say this again and again. You want to spend as little money and time as possible early on because you need to be able to walk away at any point. So we're going to start out by faking things. This is a great example. It's from IDEO, which is a design firm. They were doing a surgical implement, right? It doesn't look like a surgical implement, but the point is they were trying to figure out how should this feel in your hand when you're cutting someone open. And instead of spending a huge amount of money machining something or printing something, they taped things together that were sitting around the office. You really, really want to start this way because you really want to walk away if things aren't going well. And the more time you spend at this stage, the less likely you are to walk away when you should. So keep things very rough, do a bunch of drawings, play around with things, buy things that exist today and strap them together, right? If you're making the coolest cooler, just buy a cooler, buy a speaker, buy a blender, right? Tape them together. There you go. You have a prototype. Don't spend a bunch of time modifying a cooler. It doesn't really matter at this stage. Another thing too that people miss is to think really hard about user flow. So think about, okay, if I had this thing that's toaster size and it goes in my bedroom, where do I put it in a bedroom? Like, do I have a shelf in my bedroom to put it? Where am I going to plug it in? Does it have to be near the windows? Does it block the windows? Like, there's a lot of things that you can figure out with a cardboard box and stuff lying around your house that doesn't cost you much time. It doesn't cost you much money. And you want to do this stuff now because you need to start testing your idea, right? You don't actually have a solution to anything yet, right? You have a hypothesis of how to maybe fix something. And the key here is it is you against the problem, right? You are solving a problem. It is not you and your idea against the world. You need to go out into the world and get feedback. People are going to tell you what you're doing wrong. They're going to say, it's not really a problem I have, or, this is a better solution to this problem. But again, you want to do this early on. And you're going to do that by talking to strangers, right? Don't just pigeonhole, don't talk to your friends, talk to real human beings, gather unbiased data, people that don't care about you, don't care about your idea. You need to be willing to change path, right? Again, you're going to be learning, you're going to be iterating. You're going to get to a better solution to this problem by talking to people than you are by just sitting in your basement for 6 years. And again, talk to strangers, real strangers. It's hard. It's really hard to talk to strangers, but it's really, really good. So we're going to build a project requirements document. This sort of starts to map out what you're doing. For me, if you can't really describe what you're doing, you're going to fail, right? It can't just be what's in your head. You have to communicate to outside groups, whether it's vendors or employees or advisors, right? So document everything down. If we're building a PRD, project requirements document for the coolest cooler, right? You start with a high-level summary, right? It is a party on wheels. That is it. It's a party on wheels. That's your first slide, maybe some cool photos of coolers that you like. Then you go to the 3 key features, right? It is a cooler, it has a blender, and it plays music. Great, top features, right? No more detail than that. Then go down one level more, right? What is a user-facing specification? Okay, well, the music has to last for 10 hours. The blender has to blend 7 drinks. It needs to keep ice as ice for 2 hours. Well, whatever your specs are, right? You're drilling down. Then you go to your technical specifications. Okay, it has to have R30 walls. It has to have 20 Newton meters of torque on your blender. Whatever it is, right? You're going to drill down into that because when you share this with people, you don't want to start by saying, I have a cooler with a 20 Newton meter motor in it, right? No one knows what you're doing. You're going to start with your vision. You're going to layer it down. And then over time, you make it more and more detailed, and you keep changing things as you go. And then the other one, cost limits, right? I think people pay $300 for this blender, right? You need to at least know what your ceiling is on what humans are going to pay for this thing. And then, just keep drilling and drilling. When you start with a PRD, it's 6 slides, and by the end, it's 40. That's fine. That you're going to keep adding detail, but you add it lower down, not to the first slide. So now we're roughly ready to make a works like, looks like. A works like and a looks like, 2 completely separate things. These are both pure parts of your vision at the opposite ends of the spectrum. One is beautiful, one works. Don't mix the two. You want pure versions of your vision right now. Just tack things together, make something beautiful. Tack things together, make something functional. Again, one works, one looks good. So making your works like, if you're not an engineer, you can still kind of get started on this. SparkFun is a great resource. Adafruit is a great resource, assuming electronics are involved. McMaster is wonderful. They actually ship you what they list on the website, which a lot of places don't. YouTube is great. Adam Savage has a bunch of great stuff about this. There's tons of resources out there. And you can really start moving the ball forward. But the key is keep it flexible. Use pre-made things. Don't spend a huge amount of time doing bare metal C coding or something. Just use like Arduino frameworks or whatever it is, right? And again, you're going to keep it loose. You want to spend a small enough amount of money that if you lit it on fire in a trash can and walked away, you would not regret it, right? You still need to be flexible. You still need to be able to walk away. Also, don't use Alibaba. They're not going to ship you what you think that you're going to get. It's going to take 2 weeks, and the documentation will be in Chinese. There's a time and a place for Alibaba. Now is not that time or place. Then you're going to make a looks like. Again, remember, this is beautiful. It does nothing else. Maybe it has an LED in it. Maybe it blinks if that's part of the vision. but you're keeping it rough. It's made out of foam. It's 3D printed. It's spray painted, whatever it is, right? You can spray paint a 3D printed part and sand it many, many times to make it beautiful without having to pay for injection molded tooling. Make many options, right? Again, this is going to go back out into the world. This will be part of your testing process. Make a few versions. Don't just have one perfect version. If you're doing apps, you can use flipbooks and paper, maybe something like Figma or Canva or whatever they're called now, but those are, maybe even a little too fancy still. Play with colors and textures, go to stores, see what is the current zeitgeist, right? Like if everything is pink and glossy, great, that's good to know, right? You're making a product, you wanna make it in sort of the way that looks good. If everything is black and matte, good to know, right? Go to Target, go to Walmart, look at the competitors, look at things that are out there. There's also great ways to get free help. I love talking to people, it's fun. It's part of the reason I consult is I just like doing a bunch of stuff. I love hearing what people are up to, and so this is great, let's chat. 60, 90 minutes is kind of my limit, so we'll talk for 30, 40 minutes, maybe you have some follow-up emails, and then at some point I'll just stop responding to your emails. That's fine, it's free. But as part of that, don't be secretive. I'm not going to sign an NDA for a free consulting session, right? I made that mistake early on. We sent an NDA to an advisor, and he's just like, no, you're not paying me. Why am I going to sign this NDA? We're like, oh, fair enough. Also, as you're doing this, do a lot of Googling, learn the keywords. For every weird thing that exists in the world, there's a weird term. And it may take a long time to find what that term is, but keep finding things that get you a little closer and a little closer and a little closer, and eventually you'll find the term that is the thing that you're looking for. But it takes time. And as you do all that, log your findings, right? Log your keywords, log your websites. Oh, I found this cool thing at this exact URL. Because you think that these things that you're learning right now are gonna stick with you forever, and when the time comes to loop back and actually use the learnings, it'll all be gone, right? You'll have some vague recollection of talking to a guy in a bar. You won't actually remember he said talk to this vendor or whatever it is. So write everything down. And as part of that, also update the product requirements doc, right? That's a living document. As you learn, you should update it. So then we need to go ahead and estimate our manufacturing cost, right? Again, this is not a completely linear process, but this is a pretty good time to do it. Right? You've got a thing that functions, you've got a thing that looks pretty good, you've talked to some people. Now let's just do a quick gut check. Are we gonna ruin our lives by trying to proceed? Or do I think I can make this for roughly a reasonable price? Octopart.com and digikey.com are both great for electronics. You wanna know how much an analog digital converter costs? Go on there. Alibaba is good for getting really rough estimates of how much things cost. Again, use it with a grain of salt, be skeptical, but it is a decent way to be like, okay, a boiler module from an espresso machine is like $10 on Alibaba. Great, that's like a really rough answer. Again, everything is 80-20 here. Don't worry about the screw that goes into something, worry about the thing that costs a bunch of money, right? I've got a big machine, the housing, great, that costs $10. I don't, whatever pennies these screws cost are irrelevant here. Once you have this, run it by some advisors, get some feedback, right? Okay, I have a bill of materials. Is this a sane bill of materials, right? Again, shoot me an email. Whoever you've been talking to, shoot them an email. They may or may not respond, but that's free advice. And then also there's a few other resources such as fictive.com is really good for machined parts or injection molded parts, mechanical stuff. I like Star Rapid a lot also. They're out in Asia, but they're a really good shop. But you're not done. So we accounted for all the stuff that we can see. The thing is, no one's doing this for free. They're not running charities either. And so you have to think about all of your non-bill of materials costs, right? Any electronics part, 20, 30, maybe 50%, depending on your volumes, is what they're gonna charge on top. They're gonna drop some of them. Some of them aren't gonna work. They're gonna put them together. They're gonna have to throw some out. They have to spend their time inspecting them, making sure they're good, loading them in the machine. All that stuff you pay for. So, 20, 30, is that fair these days? Yeah, it depends on your volume. Okay. Well, sure, yeah. Yeah. So I'm assuming you're kind of hitting 2K-ish here maybe. I'm assuming you're starting out, but yes, that's why we have better panels here. Again, then simple injection molded parts, go get some quotes, but kind of overseas $5K, $2 per part if you're doing, a couple thousand or something yay big. But again, it really depends on what you're making. But remember, it takes time to test things, assemble them. Packaging is shockingly time consuming. Try taking a flat box and turning it into a built box. It's actually a lot of time. And so all of these things you have to factor in, right? If you have, last project I worked on with Maggie here was a grill. It took a long time to package that grill. I think we spent like $50 on packaging. There was a lot of shit in there to package a grill. We had not planned for that originally. So think about all those things, be a little pessimistic as you go. And also feel free to plagiarize, right? There's a lot of people making shit already. How much does their stuff cost, right? You don't have to do it from the ground up. If you're making a cooler, look what coolers cost, right? Like, okay, that cooler costs $150. I'm going to tack a bunch of stuff onto it. I'm probably not going to make money selling it for $200. All right, so hopefully at this point we've got a solution to a problem. If we're the coolest cooler, we know that people want to party on wheels. They want lights and music, blender, or at least so we think. We've also probably figured out that it costs $100 to $150 to make. That means it's going to cost $150 to $200 to make realistically. You still have to count for what is it going to take to ship it to you, right? If it's being made in Asia, it has to cross an ocean to get to you. Then it has to leave your facility and go to someone else's facility. You may have rework problems. You may have to pop the boxes open and work on them again. So there's a lot of things you have to watch out for. And so because of that, really, really rough rule of thumb, whatever your bill of materials cost is, try to sell it for 4x. That's just a really rough, right? If you sell it at REI, they take 50% right there. So if you're selling it for 2x, you make $0 when REI sells one. And then they might return it to you. So remember, this is a great time to stop. It's always a great time to stop. The sooner you stop, the better, or reevaluate. But now it's kind of the threshold. You've got some prototypes. You've got an idea of what you're doing. You're actually going to go do something. You're going to build a team. This is kind of when it becomes real. So take a gut check, think about what you're doing, and start to compromise. Every single feature costs you something. Not every feature will get paid for. So really think about that. If you're going to go sell this cooler, and you're like, yeah, but it's got sweet flashing lights. And everyone goes, yeah, whatever. Like, I don't care about the flashing lights. Just get rid of them. Kill them. They're gone, right? Every feature has to belong. So you're going to go ahead and build a team. Everyone has to be a need to have. You can't have anyone on there who's like, a good buddy who's a pretty good dude. It's not going to work out. Just avoid family where you can also. In general, a generalist is what you want here, right? Someone who can wear a lot of hats is a lot better than someone who's like the world's best Linux kernel guy, because I'm sure he's insanely smart and he's going to crush me at whatever he's doing. But you might ask him to go source a packaging vendor and he's just going to get he's going to do a terrible job potentially. So people who are flexible are great here. Consulting firms can look really, really expensive, but employees are insanely expensive. So I've seen it a lot where people get really sticker shocked at a consulting firm. I was working on a project where we looked at a few different firms. They ended up going with there's some like Indian firm that charged like $4,000. I was like, there's zero chance anything useful is going to come out of this $4,000, and zero useful work came out of that $4,000. But they used a bunch of time and deadline doing that. So, good engineers are really expensive. But especially in a hardware product, every little design piece can cost you a lot more or a lot less depending on if it was designed well. Also, if you find yourself at this stage saying, we're really a design company that just happens to make coolers, no, you're not. You're a company that's making a cooler. Just stay focused. Don't add on things that you're not actually doing. Just do the thing that you're doing right now. Now it is time for a works like, looks like. All the hyphens belong here. We're making one object, many times, but one object that does everything it's supposed to do and look nice. This is a project actually that I worked on with Boulder Engineering Studio. This was great. And so, we started out with this, square edge circuit board and a nice enclosure. And over time, they slowly became a product, right? You don't have to hit it right the first time. If you did it right the first time, you didn't actually do it right. There's something to fix. Expect this to take a few revs. And as you go, make it better, right? Start with 3D printing, go to, silicone molding, go to machining, work your way up the ladder of niceness as you go. This is still a pretty good stage, in my opinion, to be cutting corners on things like software. Still use Arduino if you can. A lot of people at this point are like, oh, we're going to have too much tech debt. No, you're not. Once you start testing this with customers, you're going to learn features. And once you have features, you're going to have to redesign the thing anyways, right? Once you start adding features that customers want, it's going to need a redesign. Again, retest your idea. Go to people that don't care about your idea. See what they think. Right? You now have a thing that works pretty well, but you didn't spend tens of thousands of dollars yet, hopefully. You haven't sunk shitloads of money. This is a great time to test your idea. We did product market fit testing where we had 20 grills that we would move between people's houses for 2 weeks at a time. And what did you think? Did you love this grill? And they would give us tons of good feedback, and we changed a lot of things based on that. It's a lot better than building 1,000 grills and then learning those lessons. All right, so it's, again, another time to recheck pricing. This is a nice feature list from the Kickstarter, right? So you've got a blender, Bluetooth speaker, USB charger, light, gear tie down, cutting board, nice wheels, storage, and a bottle opener. So much shit on this thing. Will people pay for it, right? You need to start figuring that out now. And we're also not done. We still have a lot of other stuff to account for. So we're 25 slides in, and we're only just now getting to the manufacturing part. Part of that is because there's just a shitload of information to put in here, and what's going to happen is I'm just going to rush through the last part of these slides. The good news is the people who are actually qualified to talk about this are going to be here for the Q&A. So we're just going to give an overview of sort of the hard knock lessons one can learn along this way and the things you don't know, but I'm not going to get too detailed into this. And remember, it's not purely linear. As we go, we can always cut back. It's never a bad time to cut ties. So manufacturing vendor selection, the thing everyone wants to say is fast, cheap, good, pick one, hopefully two. It's totally true. You'll never get three, right? We live in a relatively efficient market. If someone is really fast and really good, guess what? Everyone's going to pile in. They're going to become so busy they won't be cheap anymore, right? It's just how it works. There's always going to be something that eats away at something, whether it's cost or quality or whatever it is. And remember that while one vendor might be amazing for Apple, they're going to not be a good vendor for you, right? You need the right vendor at your size, and realistically, your size is really fucking small. So don't turn your nose up at a vendor because, they won't be able to support us once we're hitting 100,000. That's a great problem to have. Go solve that problem with a bunch of money in your pocket. Start out. Don't put on airs and get a vendor that's really big because they will also be really disappointed in you. If you fall behind, if they think they're going to make $1 million off you and they make $100,000, they're going to stop giving a shit when you need things. All right, so you have to understand their constraints, build a personal relationship, actually seeing eye to eye with them. It may not be the factory boss, but you're going to have some contact, and they have to actually care when your stuff doesn't work. If they don't care, it's going to be horrible for you. Contract manufacturers, CMs are really good here, especially if you're small. They're basically a one-stop shop. They will ship you a final thing. And final means final, right? It doesn't mean final minus the paint. It doesn't mean final minus the packaging. You need a final thing, right? You can't ship things to customers that are just missing one part. That means that if you have a complicated thing, you may have to do a lot of looking around. You may have to find a CM that has contacts in all these different spaces. And again, that's where it's good to work with different partners and good to work with a real CM. If you try to go to China and just find a bunch of sub-vendors and then ship all those sub-parts to yourself in the US and put them together, it's not going to work. You need a CM there who can yell in Chinese at the sub-vendors, who can reject parts at the location, right? And part of that is that supply chains could be efficient, but they could be really, really expensive, right? If you've got the world's best injection molder in Thailand and the world's best assembly house in Mexico, and you're going to ship those things from Thailand to Mexico, if they arrive in Mexico not good, what are you going to do? You're going to send a box of stuff back to Thailand and eat the 2 months that it takes and the $10,000 you spent shipping things across the ocean? You don't want to, right? Try to keep your supply chains relatively short. For better or worse, this is why you often end up in China because they have everything in one place. There are many reasons why working in China is not great. The flip side is they're really good at what they do. They have great supply chains, but that's becoming better over time. It is getting easier to not do that. But just remember, if you've got everything but your USB cables, you still don't have your USB cables, as we've learned that lesson. So his name is Robert Fullerton, and he was a great asset to us. When we did our first Kickstarter campaign, we were fresh out of school. We launched. We made $250,000. Everything was looking great. And this guy reached out and was like, so what's your plan for making these things? We're like, that's a great question, Bob. So we met with him, and he basically ushered us through. He was our concierge. He found us a vendor that was the right size for us. He vouched for us. When we needed boxes, he knew a box guy, right? He took a cut, and that's fine. Our incentives were aligned. Everyone's happy. Everyone in this industry is taking a cut. Try to avoid too many middlemen, but if you do have someone, make sure they're good. Bob was great. I really liked working with him. You can work with Zebulon or Boulder Engineering Studio. They'll also play that role for you. Don't try to go it alone. Don't try to learn Mandarin and then talk to sub-vendors. Just have someone that has people that, they have a network, right? If they burn you, they've burned Bob, and Bob is bigger than you, right? So you want to keep that in mind. You need people who can kind of help you out in these spaces because personal relationships are actually pretty important in this world. Important lesson learned, blue is not a color, aluminum is not a material. Pantone 2387XGC, that is a color. That is a color that someone can make. But if you tell someone to send you blue, I guarantee you it's not the blue you think. They might think that shirt is blue for all you know, right? It's a whole different world. Same with materials, right? Aluminum 6063, that's a material. That's a thing that someone can buy and they can machine. Now, you might go to a vendor and say, look, I'm aluminum agnostic. Which one do you want? And they'll say, we use 6063. Great. Put that on the documents. Because you don't want to find out that down the road they change to some cheaper version of aluminum without you knowing, and they'll go, you said aluminum, right? Your parts are different. They're not the parts you got the first time, but they followed the rules, right? Blue is blue. It just may not be the same blue every time you order it. So you have to really get into the weeds here. I'm not a details guy. This is usually where I start trying to like find the exits on a project, but this stuff is really important. It's what makes or breaks it, right? You need to go through your parts with your vendors. You need to actually, go through every single detail. Make sure they're happy with the parts, right? It's gonna be impossible for us to machine that one thing. You need to go redesign it if that's true, because you can spend a lot of money and ask them. Send them a part, because often they won't say, these parts are shit. What they'll say is, here's your cost. This cost is way too high. You have to say, here's my part. What would you recommend I change? And then they'll go, oh yeah, here's a laundry list of what's wrong with your part. Great, right? You want real advice. You don't want a pat on the back. So knowing how to kind of do those conversations, coming in with humility, saying, look, please give me feedback on these parts. Every vendor is different. They have different machines. Even though you design something perfectly for one vendor doesn't mean the next vendor is going to like it. Talk to your vendors, take feedback, all of that. As part of that too, we have to worry about quality control, right? Keep in mind that someone who probably never went to high school is going to decide if this thing ships or not. And so you have to have clear objective metrics. You have to have test fixtures. You have to have a piece of metal with a hole in it. And if the thing doesn't go through the hole, it cannot be accepted. It has to be that simple. You have what are called golden samples. You make a thing that looks really nice and you sign your name on it and you say, this is the perfect version. Make this. And then you make a version right next to it and you say, this is as shitty as it's allowed to be. Because they're not all perfect, right? You have to accept it can be this wobbly. It can be this not blue. But you have to have a thing that a person can look at and say, I don't know. And by the end, after they've made a few thousand of your products, these people are better than you. It's great. You'll go on the line and they'll be like, they'll take the thing and hand it to you and they're like, not good. And you're like, the fuck's not wrong with this, right? But they learn. They get it better than you, but you have to work with them. You have to be there. You have to physically be in the factory, plan to be there for a couple weeks. And yeah, take this seriously. Quality control is really tedious. It seems very expensive. Rework is horribly expensive. If you get something to your office and you realize there's a problem, you have to break every box open, that sucks. If you send it to a customer, you spent money shipping it, and they spend money shipping it back and being pissed off at you, that is really, really, really expensive. So I hate doing this. I'm not going to pretend I'm a saint here, but it is really important. Firmware and software. This is me fixing firmware bugs at a shoot at the Flatirons. Every feature you have in there is going to be a problem. Just cut the features out, right? People go, oh, it's software. It doesn't matter. Yes, it fucking does. Like, you're going to spend a lot of time writing these features. Every single piece of complexity is a new bug. Talk to your developers. Ask them, is this feature really annoying? And they might go, yes, but here's how we can make it less annoying, right? The same thing you have to do with your vendors and your manufacturing and your mechanical parts, you should do with your software, because if you don't, you're going to end up with a shitload of bugs and a lot of time spent fixing it. This is, again, where really good engineers help, but you still have to acknowledge a lot of engineers don't necessarily communicate super well. They might talk really well with computers, but they may not tell you proactively, hey, this is not going to work. They might just seem really grumpy. And so, really ask them ahead of time and say, look, like, is this going to work? How can we work together to make this less bad or easier to deal with? And also, if you're doing apps, do cross-platform. Don't do Swift or Android native. I knew this company that was like a 5-person company with 2 developers, one for Swift and one for Android, for like a Bluetooth-enabled water bottle. You don't need native apps. Like, you're spending twice as much money as you should on this. Just do it cross-platform. You can probably hire a contractor. It's easier. Certifications, the worst part of this whole process. I hate certifications, but they have to be done. Don't leave them to the last minute, as I always do. I always do this last, and it always burns me. Buy pre-certified modules. If you're doing Bluetooth Low Energy, don't be like, oh, I'll save 30 cents by doing it myself. No, you won't. You're going to have such a bad time dealing with the FCC. Buy a pre-certified module. Just get that done. Understand, if you do Bluetooth, you have to deal with the Bluetooth Special Interest Group. You have to pay them money. You have to do a testing process to show that your stuff doesn't suck. FCC, IC, CE, every country is going to have their own stuff. Brazil once just stopped accepting our stuff because they had something that obviously we didn't care about. Apple is also a total pain. If you want to sell it in the Apple store, if you're doing like an iPhone case, don't do it. Just don't do it now. I worked on an iPhone case. It was horrible. That client lost so much money. And the whole time I was just like, guys, you just got to cut ties. Like, this is not going well. Like, we put a battery in an iPhone case, and it turns out your GPS doesn't work so good when there's a battery right there. And there's all other kinds of stuff too, right? If you want to talk through the Lightning port, not fun. You can do it, but not fun. All right, shipping logistics. Do it yourself is not a bad start. There's a million options here. There's 3PLs, which you can look up, third-party logistics. You need to have tracking for a product. Don't bother with insurance. I've never won an insurance claim. It doesn't matter if they destroyed the box and you have a photo of it, they will claim it got delivered. Right? You will never ever win a shipping claim. Don't bother. And assume that you'll lose 1 to 2% of things. They'll just disappear into the ether. You'll never see them again. You'll have to reship them at your cost. Funding, there's a million things talking about this. I'm not gonna get too deep into funding, also because I hate doing it and it's not my expertise by any means. But the later you raise, the better, right? The more finished your product is, the less risk you carry. Therefore, the more money you get for your company. That's why you want to stay loose and light early on, raise really late when you actually know what you're doing. And also understand, most overnight cessations took 5-7 years, right? Look at something like Peloton. It took them forever to get there. Just acknowledge it's going to be a long road and fund accordingly. Don't assume the money's going to come in and save you from having to fundraise in 6 months. All kinds of other stuff, customer support. You have to have a website. You have to do marketing. Again, none of this stuff is what I enjoy doing. The book Zag is quite a good one, Z-A-G. It's kind of good for kind of marketing and placing yourself. But remember, when you're done, when you spend all this money, all this time, all this bullshit, you still have to support this thing. You're not actually done. So just keep that in mind. All right, so there we go. That's everything. As promised, I rushed through the last bit and it was probably low information. I apologize for the fire hose. We're going to move to our panel side. So if there's any questions, which I'm sure there are, Chuck and Dan will be joining me up here, and we'll be basically, answering whatever questions you have. Yeah, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I know I personally love to just chit chat over stuff. Buy me some nachos or something. We'll call it good. I'm sure Dan and Chuck do as well. So here's where you can find us, and we will move to the panel section. Thank you. Any questions? Oh, shit. I could just talk for twice as long. Or twice as slowly. All right, Maggie. I don't know how this works.
Can you hear me? Okay. When you have like a new product that has like a new type of technology in it, when would you say like product integration is kind of like the most important thing? What percentage would you wait for that tech to be worked out?
Very relevant question.
Having done a few startups where we were trying to invent the tech and then the product, and I've got at least 4 failed startups under my belt early on, I would say run away, don't do it, or raise a lot of money. I mean, you either need to be the leader and just, this is an R&D play. And people do this in medical devices, military stuff. I mean, you raise a few $100 million and go after it, but it's really tough because the guys with the real money, and if Apple's in play or any of those guys are in play, you're going to be so far behind when it comes out. So I would be really careful about integrating brand new stuff in it unless you got the chops to do the full R&D play.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to really, you could look at pharma. And if you are pharmaceutical and you're going for the cure for cancer, we all see the news articles of this company dumped $800 million in 14 years, and the clinical didn't work. 0 benefit. Even worse if they hurt people. So R&D and novel technology really depends on what you're doing. When we're in early discovery phase type work and following phase development, we call a lot of that, are we breaking the rules of physics? Can we even get this done, or is it the perpetual energy machine? So a lot of that is challenge these pieces earlier and continue to go back to what is the problem? Is there a different solution to solving the problem that may be easier, that may be more effective? The other piece is a lot of really good R&D and novel work is kind of classified in what you might call university or lab breakout. So you might be looking at STTR, which are tech transfers out of federal labs, universities, things like that. SBIR funding. These are your areas where you can both get funds to be a research company before you're a development company, before you're a product company, but also there are areas that if you want to be a product company, you might be able to go, and if it's like an STTR, you might be able to license tech out of NASA that's been working on this for 15 years. Hey, cool, it's been figured out now. Now the challenge is commercialization, and if that's what you're good at, you get to do what you're good at. But what you don't want to do is, hey, we got a thing that we know NASA really wants and they haven't figured it out yet. We can figure it out. How becomes one of the bigger questions and bigger plays there. And you've got to just keep going back to, is there a simpler way to do it?
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point there about, you want to be solving a problem, right? Like, is there an easier way to solve this problem? Not just, is there a way to apply this tech that I know how to do to a problem? And also just the note of, what you might be really good at, such as R&D lab work may not scale to producing something. I actually really like the show Silicon Valley. There's a great scene where they get a bunch of money and, he thinks the job is over, and then now he has to go find an office. And he's like, I don't want to find an office. They're like, well, you're the CEO. If you're thinking of actually making a product, I really recommend that show because it's full of a lot of those hard lessons. But yeah.
Is this working? Yeah. Okay. Have the past couple of years changed your opinions at all of risk versus benefit of manufacturing in specific countries and offshore versus reshore in general?
Yeah, the last few years have been a total mess in the supply chain. I mean, it used to be supply chain was a challenge. Now supply chain is the challenge. And I would even say that in design. I mean, we were talking before this. I mean, there's people who are designing 5 or 6 variants of their product depending on which chip they think they can get that month. So it's a unholy mess. A lot of politics associated with China versus not China and stuff. I mean, I'm not sure that's changed in some ways. I mean, China's being more responsible on COVID and they're paying a price for it. And there's stuff going on there. But I would be very careful. His comment about shorten the supply chain is super important. And, know what you're getting. We recently did some plastic sourcing. And we have a good China supplier, but our customer wanted a domestic supplier. And so that's fine. We'll go find somebody. But the number of companies that quoted on it, that when we drilled down, were actually either making the tools or the parts in China, was all but one. So you got to be very careful. And to your question, I mean, there are a lot more pitfalls. There's always been pitfalls. There's a lot more now, and especially in the supply chain aspect.
Yeah, I mean, and to answer your question, yes and no. Do I have faith in the supply chain? Not really. Did I ever have faith in the supply chain? No. And it's not that manufacturers, vendors, shippers, it's not that they're not good at what they do. Generally, and especially if you've found the right ones, they're very good at what they do. But supply chain, manufacturing, all of these, it's a little bit like a tree. And everything gets very, very snowflakey. So when we're talking about contract manufacturer, subcontract manufacturer, where does this come in? Where does that go in? A lot of it for us ties back into early design phase. What are the requirements? What are the specifications? You're talking about RF. We actually do a ton of chip down design for certification and quality there, and do a massive amount of FCC pre-scan, even on prototype 1. We'll just do that in-house. Then we'll go up to Longmont, rent a chamber for an afternoon. So that way it's an incremental, iterative growth. But when you bring that back to supply chain, did the dielectric of the PCB change? Did I even have that recorded in these are my manufacturing? Did I tie my purchase order to say, if you don't do it like I say in the paper, I don't pay for it? You would think, well, isn't that what it works? They didn't do what's on the paper. Actually, if you don't write that in the contract and the purchase order, you're still going to pay for it, and you're probably going to be sending stuff to e-waste. So the overarching theme there is, what happens if this goes wrong? If you ask yourself that at every step, whether it's a long supply chain or a short one, and you say, what happens if the Port of Los Angeles closes for 2 weeks and my container doesn't get out? What happens if I get counterfeit chips? How do I not get counterfeit chips shipped out of Asia? The answer is probably a really good test fixture that can run through and test all of these things. And if it's a counterfeit chip that passes your test fixture, maybe you're okay, actually. So it really becomes, what do I do if things go wrong, and how do I get ahead of that?
Quick follow-up. Has it changed how and when you think about creating redundancy? What stage of the company, and is redundancy mean separate countries now at this point because you're worried about lockdowns, or what degree?
So every product is different. If we're doing consumer electronics and it's going to be a high volume play, our philosophy has always been you've got prototype vendors and you've got mass manufacturing vendors. And with some of the increased costs of transportation, we don't know when the next lockdown's coming or transport, we've gotten those lines a little bit more blurry to try to actually utilize that stuff as a dual source. So if we've got a low volume aluminum tool injection mold that we used for a late stage prototype or even the DVT at, say, Proto Labs, and we're paying $8 in plastic per, we've already got the tool. Our Asian supplier or our Mexico, Taiwan, wherever, we pay 60 cents a piece. But we use those sometimes as surge capacity. So Proto Labs, if you pay for it, you can have your parts in 2 weeks. You can't necessarily accelerate your 90-day to 180-day forecasted out plastic part plus transport. But if Target or a big box calls and says, we want 50,000, congratulations, you are the Black Friday doorbuster, being able to fire up that prototype and take the margin hit is sometimes a really valuable play to keep those pieces warm. That's still kind of a late stage example, but that's a way to utilize what you have incrementally built along the Candyland demo to get there to your advantage.
Yeah, I deal much more in kind of proof of concept and prototype stage, and I have a client that's quite low volume, and we'll actually, if there's a chip that we think we're going to use, we'll just buy 50 right then. It's like, okay, we're going to build 50 prototypes, let's buy 50 now, so at least we can build a prototype, because I've designed things, and it's taken me 2 weeks to design them, and then the chip is gone, and it's just like, you spend all that time. So to that point, yes, I will pre-buy certain things, like certain ICs I think might run away, especially early on, but yeah, and I think, one thing that these guys are talking about, which is really good, is that I have it as a very linear thing. I've designed and manufacturing as kind of separate things. They really aren't. You want to be talking to manufacturers early on and kind of working that through. But yes, things have become more, in my opinion, a little bit more painful, at least with COVID.
A little more on that, not so much alt sourcing. I think we agree on that, but where before we kind of assumed if it's in DigiKey, we can probably get it. For sure, at every level in the design now, we're thinking about, before I design that component in, let me go look at the broader supply chain and see what it looks like out there. I mean, there's a lot more of that effort, and it's not just chips. Stainless steel PEMs blew one of our projects up. I mean, the PEM's the little thing that you put the screw into. Wonderful shop. We've worked with them for years. They're always good, 5-6 weeks delivery on sheet metal stuff. And suddenly they went to 50 weeks because they couldn't get a bag of PEMs. I mean, we ended up buying, we have a lot of PEMs. Anybody wants to come talk to me about them? We get 10,000 of them on a product that uses 400 a year, right? But those things didn't blow up before nearly as often. They did. And at really high volumes, of course, you have to deal with it. But you got to at least start thinking about that earlier than you used to, would be my one word of warning.
How frequently do you find that you have to just take a loss on the first 1,000 or 10,000 units? I mean, if price is part of what is going to make your product sell or not, and at low volume, obviously things cost more. I mean, do you just need to count on selling at a loss with those first ones to figure out if you got something?
So that's the Kickstarter one when you showed your example there. I mean, we've seen this not so much recently, but back in the heyday there. Not only did they only raise $212, which is probably less than they should be selling it for, but they really need to use most of that money for R&D and stuff. So if you've got a serious product and a serious company, I mean, all the ones, the heavy-duty startups. I was in Silicon Valley. I did a ton of startups there. I was then at Flextronics, and we worked with a ton of really big startups. The heavy-duty guys are assuming they're going to lose money for decades. The medical products folks, there's companies out there. We worked with a company in the continuous glucose monitoring space. I mean, they're still not profitable. They've been public for 10 years. So there are a lot of spaces where, yes, that is, if you don't do it, competitors are doing it. That said, that's super painful, and you should, I guess my only advice, know that you're going into it. Know that you're making these for $150 and selling them for $100. like with an Xbox or something like that. Don't be surprised by it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really hard question because the answer is you're always going to lose money on your first 10,000 depending on what you put on which side of the equation. So a lot of this comes down to what is the schedule, what is the Gantt chart, what is the planning, and honestly, if you want to go really, really simple on a financial operations, what's CapEx, what's sunk cost, and what's your actual product cost? When you're doing a product, sunk costs, research, development, prep, all of that, you're not going to make your money back on your first 1,000 devices unless it is 95% gross margin, single source to the government, military type stuff. Maybe you could pull that off, but it's a one and done type play. So you've got to make your margin back there. If you're going for a sustained growth business, you need to say, this is the money I'm going to sink into R&D. This is the money I'm going to sink into CapEx and production scaling. This is my contingency that I'm going to blow and then some on those first two things, and then here's my product, here's my margins, here's how my margins improve. Not starting negative, but here's how they improve when I grow. If you're going to say, I've already separated all those things, but now in order to break into the market, I need to sell at a loss, I'm going to chalk it up to a marketing, don't do that. You've already lost. If you have a product that you have to sell at a loss so the market will accept it, you have lost. So that's you've already broken the first rule of what will the market bear. And getting to scale won't help that, it just makes it worse. You can look at some of the biggest blow-ups. Peloton may be close to an example of that for up and coming.
One that I will say on that is that your product is not really your product in the sense that, like, to the point of prototype tooling and things like that, you're going to do your first run of however many thousands, and you're going to learn things, right? And then you're going to make it more efficient. So, if you're breaking, if it's like a reasonable business at low volumes, then it will be a business at high volumes. But yeah, I would caution against planning to lose money for too long. But it comes down to money, right? If you have a ton of money, if you have enough money that you can do all this stuff at the start and just be like, oh, we're not even going to count that as unit cost, right? We're not going to amortize that out. It's going to be, VC money. That's magic money. And then the product makes money after that. It might work out. But yeah, it is tough.
Yeah, those are prototypes and user demos. They're not your product on the shelf.
Along those same lines, can you give people a sense for the cost of like the first 1,000 units to 10,000 units, 100,000, million units? Like what kind of percent cost decrease you see as your volume to go up?
The rule of thumb that we've always used is 20% per decade as a really simple rule of thumb. Tends to work okay with chips. If you go to DigiKey or other more high volume sources, Avnet or whatever, and kind of plot out kind of a log scale is there. Mechanicals don't scale as well, but there's other things you can also do. I mean, moving from a high cost region to a low cost region. But there's an investment. I'd say there's definitely an investment. Think of it as an ROI. I'm going to go spend a couple $1 million setting up China, and then I'm going to save 20% of my costs or something like that. But I would certainly scale that out. When you're doing your cost estimate, do it at several different volumes. Do it at a low volume, do it at a medium, do it at high, and then make different assumptions and then see where you get to. And it depends on your product, depends on how the pieces of it scale. It certainly can go down, but it doesn't go down to a tenth or something like that unless you can do tools, medical devices and stuff. I mean, the first tool is this big. The production tool's got 64 cavities in it, and of course the stuff is cheaper, right? So that works.
Yeah, this is going to sound slightly counterintuitive, but getting hey, this is how many units I'm going to do per year, it can be a very wide range, but at least getting kind of the rough grouping right when you're in early design will have a huge impact. If you designed a product to have good margins and a good manufacturing technique and match the volume of tools, the number of cavities, this type of electronics, we're using these ICs, we're using a module versus a chip down, all of those pieces might work really great at 1,000 pieces per year. Oh my God, we're successful. I need to do 50,000 a year. You have to make a huge investment to redo your product to actually be able to be done at 50,000. So the question's a little hard to answer because, well, I was doing 1,000 and they cost me $95 cost of goods. At 50,000, why is it costing me $105? The answer might be because you ran out of the global supply of the specific type of UV whatever plastic you needed, and you had to commission more, and that's at a higher cost. So sometimes that isn't a slide. Sometimes it's a ladder, and that's where, again, we're back to that break out the CapEx for what am I doing here, and where's the true ROI. In true generic terms, let's say that we're going from 100,000 to $1 million. It really depends. If you've got those costs separated, you might see a 30, a 50% reduction, maybe a 60, but you're going to have invested in better automation, better screening, better quality control. One of the actual full-blown product lines that Best does, besides consulting at this point, is we've been working on end-of-line test fixtures and having those actually as a product that can be rapidly adapted, or we can just sell off the frame and have the client do the specific PCB for the bed of nails and things like that to help kind of bridge that transition and make those costs easier. There's lots of other players in that space. There's mechanical presses, there's fixtures, there's jigs, I got a plate with a hole in it, and if it doesn't fit, but be thinking about how do I do my test-driven design, my validation in design. Can this part be jigged? Is that jig going to give me the go, no-go that I need? Getting those early in design is what allows costs to actually go down as you scale up. If you don't have those pieces, you are going to be on the manufacturing floor being like, good, good, not good. Boy, I remember when I had a family over on a different continent 2 months ago.
For more B2C products, what advice would you give when it comes to both developing the product itself, but also the packaging design? Like getting the product together, getting the packaging together. How do you cross those wires? What's some advice on putting that together so then you can ultimately work with retailers and get it B2C?
So if people go look me up in the history and other startup weeks, I have forever been the product guy and put your money where the value and the return on investment is. So I think there's probably quotes from me floating around all the way back to 2010, like, you got a stamp, you got a brown paper bag, you've got a basic package. Don't overthink it, don't overdo it. One of the worst things that you can do before you're ready is over-optimize the cost of your packaging. I actually started when I was in college. I worked at the Apple store, helped open it up in Boulder, under kind of the visuals guru, who now that's what he does for Apple nationally. So he was one of my mentors. Their packaging, their presentation is excruciating, and it's expensive. Apple is not the first retailer you want to go into. Hell, they're probably the retailer you never want to go into, and I say that having to actually put products in there, not just online, but also in storefront and also in window displays. And I don't know, I think with one product in particular, that probably ate 20% of the extra margin. I don't think the volume was justified. I don't think it was a good business decision, and I told them that at the time. So simple, eco-friendly packaging, packaging that you can get, packaging that you can change out. I've always just been, there's nothing wrong with brown cardboard and printed on labels, and if it folds up nicely, that's great. There's good local resources for doing packaging. There's good global packaging, but, oh, we want to invest in blow mold and this and that. Well, why? Does it help you get your logistics? Does it reduce the number of units that break in shipping? Do you have high vibration, or vibration sensitive rather, components in your product? If your speaker system, I won't shake that, but you shake it and things come loose and it's all broken when it gets to your customer, you need better packaging. This circles all the way back to packaging as a product. What are the requirements? What are the specifications? What are the testable criteria? How do I validate it? And then how do I enforce that validation on the supply chain?
So I'll tell a quick story first on this. Back in a previous life, when I was at Flextronics, I ran a number of global design groups. And let's just say we had a very large customer doing game consoles. We won't name who they are since we're videotaping this, that we worked a lot with. And one of the projects we worked on was the pack out cost reduction. So for a game console, the pack out for this, the bill of materials cost on that was greater than all the mechanicals, the fans, the enclosure, the sheet metal, the plastics. You added all that up, and then you added the cost of the pack out. The pack out was more money. Now this is again to your point in the name brand space and the top level space. So I mean, there is a lot of money put into it, and people tend to think, oh my God, I'm going to spend a lot of money on plastic and sheet metal and screws, and that fan's expensive. And they don't think, oh, and my cardboard's going to cost more. So that's just one lesson. From an engineer, I can't comment a whole lot on what it takes to get into retail stores and stuff, but from an engineer, the one thing I do worry about in pack out is how does it hold up in shipping? I mean, UPS is brutal, FedEx, the shipping that we all do these days is brutal. We've all gotten damaged stuff. So while I would be fine with a label on a cardboard, test your pack out against shipping standards for shock and vibe. If you have air ride, it's actually a different spec than if you don't. There are a lot of issues. The drop test issue is super real. We've got a customer right now that most of the stuff goes on a pallet, but sometimes it goes individual, and like 10% of the individual boxes are damaged from UPS. So don't skimp on the I need to keep the package from breaking part. His advice is probably pretty good on the what you need to do to make it beautiful and stuff.
Yeah, on that note, though, I will say it really depends on your product. If your product's light and not terribly fragile or sensitive vibration, then there's a lot of companies that sell. You can basically buy customized boxes from someone. We had, for some of our products that were easy to do this with, we did lick and stick packaging, which meant it was just totally ready to ship. We just had the thing, everything was on there. You just stick a label on and send it out. That actually saves a lot of money. You spend a lot of money on like the extra box. And Dan mentioned the kind of eco-friendly thing. That's a great way to save money, right? Like, oh, we're eco-friendly. We just use simple cardboard instead of painted cardboard. If you can make that a benefit and not a cost for yourself, that's good. But yeah, it really depends on what your method is. If you're shipping it, you need a different kind of packaging than if it's in a retail store and all of that.
Don't forget your overpack. If these are coming from China, you're not sending them in one little box like this. There's boxes and cartons on a pallet type of thing. So make sure that you've thought through it. None of that needs to be cosmetic, but it all needs to be thought through. And that can add up to real money too.
Yep.
Especially in today's market, how and when do you address sole sourcing?
In first prototype? No, I'm somewhat tongue-in-cheek there, but it depends on what the part is. The nature of an early stage business, and I didn't say startup, I said early stage business, is you're only going to have one injection mold tool. You're not going to pay for redundancy there. You're not going to qualify multiple vendors, most likely. Maybe you've got that prototype tool that I mentioned early on that you can kind of dual source. So this comes to relationship building, integrity, and planning for the contingencies. If you are in electronics, we've had some really wonderful integrated ICs that have come out in the past decade, 2 decades. Lots of digital systems. Audio processing is a great example. Power conversion, power management. Linear Technologies has some of the best, complex, super teeny, super cost-effective power management units. They're fantastic. You can't buy them. So we've done, in the past couple of years, we've done a lot more rolling backwards and going kind of like, yeah, it'd be great to have a motor controller in here. And we're going to go old school. We're going to build an analog-based H-bridge. And that's what's going to work because that's what we can buy components for. That's what we can come up with substitutes for. And therefore, oh, this MOSFET's no longer available. Well, that's okay because we designed it with a class of MOSFET where there are a wide array of not single source options.
Yeah, totally agree. For the most part, I think, at least for the scope here, I mean, if your volumes are not ridiculous, I mean, if you're Apple or something, it's a different game. It's usually better to build relationships with your key vendors, have one contract manufacturer, sell yourself like crazy to that CM, right? I mean, endear yourself. But I'd have a backup plan. I know if something fell apart there, I'd have a backup plan. With your plastic molder, again, you don't want to pay for two different sets of tools, but think about a plan. Sheet metals, we do tend to keep a couple sources on things like that. The chips, it's almost impossible with these complicated ones because they are all single, but we might have a version of the board design just in waiting in case we can't get that analog device chip, and now we've got one with a linear version on it. So get smart about it, but it's tough to predict. I mean, the stuff that we predicted and been proactive on over the past few years, it seems like we're always then burned by some stupid MOSFET or I mean, just really the power management chips you mentioned, things that were always just nickel and dime. So it's tough to get. So be alert to it, but I wouldn't, for the most part, I would certainly not recommend deliberately second sourcing. I would much more recommend being alert to supply chain stuff and having backup plans.
Yeah, on that, one of the things that you can do that's really important on the engineering, keep your RFQ packages basically up to date. So if you've got to design a system, manufacturing, here's how it's getting done, your manufacturer, your CM, they're going to take your instructions and they're going to build their own work instructions. That's just the nature of the beast. But keep in touch. Figure out what modifications they've done on the assembly as far as order of operations or how they're grabbing parts. So that way, if the relationship falls apart, they get into whatever situation, they get volume limited, you've got an RFQ package where you can go and you can say, even if it's as simple as my sheet metal shop, the owner got sick or retired or they got sold, I need to get out and get this requoted and get another vendor. Keeping that document package up to date and ready to go, that's inexpensive. Setting up dual and backup CMs, that is expensive, but having it ready that you can flip on a dime isn't nearly as hard.
Yeah, that's all great. So we're at time, but I'm happy to. I mean, I don't know, you guys. Yeah, well, we'll do one more question, and we could also just evolve to chit chat from. So we have one more question at least.
What are your thoughts on distribution or sales model, whether it's something like Amazon fulfillment for direct to consumer or other avenues or paths for that?
In all honesty, I don't have a ton of thoughts on it. Every product is different. So Amazon fulfillment has worked fantastic for a few products that I know. And it has been we're out of business for another few products. So you really need to evaluate, what am I doing? Am I a big product? Am I a little product? What are my actual costs? I'll go to an example a long time ago, a product called Compo Keeper. That's a compost garbage can. Back in 2012, we actually set up injection mold shops on each coast. It was basically a domestic-based product only, but the shipping was so inhibitantly expensive to get from coast to coast that it was cheaper to actually manufacture at two different sites and have two different tools. A little bit of a unique situation, and things have gotten a bit more interconnected and easier since then, but sometimes a 3PL can be really helpful for that, and sometimes you need to say, hey, how do I stage this regionally as opposed to one single place? We're in Denver, we get to cheat a little bit because we're kind of equidistant from everything.
Don't have much expertise in this, but I would say if that's the type of, if you're in that type of business, if you're B2C and stuff like that, and even some of the B2B, that ought to be very early in your plan, back on the early stages, is what's my distribution network? How am I going to manage it? What are my options there? There are a zillion options these days. I mean, Amazon's super easy, but we've also had customers who've been successful with it and those who have flopped. There are 3PLs for big products, there's lots of there's literally distributors for a lot of things. If you're doing an industrial product, you sell it through McMaster-Carr type of thing. So, thinking through that strategy and weighing the options and hopefully having people on your team, you need a Bob for distribution too, Jenna or whoever for that, because that's a huge part of what you're doing. And to your comment earlier, they're going to take a cut on everything, so make sure that's in your model.
Yeah, and the note there is good. Amazon can be great if you plan for it. It could also just be a total vampire on your business if you don't. So just something to be aware of. And that ties into packaging and everything else too. It's all part of the kind of product design. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Appreciate you all coming. And I think we'll just hang around and chit chat, answer any questions people have. And I think we're all good from there.
Good job, Steve.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.